It's Monday night. This is Breaking the News. I'm Jana Shortle. So in the wake of any tragedy, people always want to help, and that's been happening in the hours after the shooting at Annunciation. You've seen GoFundMes for pretty much every victim because we all know the medical costs for so many are going to be big. And crowdfunding to pay for health care is sadly extremely common in this country, even with people that have insurance. Well, tonight we're finding out that hospitals around our state are suing patients for unpaid medical bills again, more than they have in the last several years. What's behind that? Here's Kent.
Even as concerns about medical debt filled the Minnesota Capitol in 2024, medical debt lawsuits were increasingly filling our legal system.
And it makes up a significant part of court dockets across the country.
Lester Bird with the Pew Charitable Trust and David McClendon with January Advisors collaborated on a new report detailing a national surge in debt collection lawsuits, including a return to 2019 levels here in Minnesota. How does medical debt figure into that in our state?
So medical debt makes up about 14% of all the consumer debt that we're tracking in Minnesota.
In reality, they say it's likely even higher because that doesn't include lawsuits stemming from medical debt paid for with credit cards or debt that was sold or handed off to a debt collector. In fact, the only way to easily identify medical debt lawsuits is when a hospital system sues directly, and some do so more than others.
The safety net hospitals like HCMC aren't filing these cases.
McClendon says Fairview Health Services outpaced everyone in 2024.
Right now, they are definitely the top filer.
In a statement to KARE 11 today, Fairview said, "We exhaust every possible option to support patients," adding litigation is only pursued in rare circumstances, roughly 1% of our clinical bills, and never against patients who don't qualify, such as those with insufficient assets or clear inability to pay. But there appear to be plenty more patients on the margins.
We see a really high default rate or a really high rate of people not engaging in these lawsuits in Minnesota.
Bird says that's concerning because the median filing only involves about $1,500 in medical debt, and 75% of cases are for less than $2,500.
These are for folks who are struggling to meet their deductible, not struggling to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt.
I've had to choose between buying groceries or paying a full medical bill.
Cancer survivor Jen Schultz was among those who pushed for Minnesota's Debt Fairness Act last year, which was signed by Governor Walz and began providing some protections last fall.
The protections that were passed in Minnesota were a good step. I think there was some protections to make sure, especially lower income people who were being sued and having their wages garnished would have more money week to week while they pay back sort of debts that were owed.
But if you're still facing a bill and feeling hopeless, they have one piece of advice.
Try to engage in these cases, try to come to a settlement. If you owe these debts and they're valid and legitimate, trying to come to a settlement. If you can't, reaching out, trying to find legal help across the state.
A lot of folks could be eligible for legal aid assistance through their local legal aid organization.
Worst thing you can do is to ignore these lawsuits. The best thing you can do is try to engage.
Now, we've got more information on the lengthy response we received from Fairview, along with Minnesota's Debt Fairness Act, on KARE11.com. Now, one of the new protections in that act ensures patients who successfully defend medical debt lawsuits get paid back for attorney fees. But here's the problem with that. According to Bird, less than 4% of patients ever hire a lawyer. That's why he says legal aid is so important to connect people to, Jana.
Well, that makes sense, though, Kent. If we put ourselves into people's shoes like that, if you're really, paycheck to paycheck, you already can't pay the bill and you keep getting notices, it feels hopeless at that point. But they're just saying call them anyway?
Yeah, there are nonprofit legal aid centers that will connect you and tell you maybe if you qualify. He said a lot of people might not realize that they do qualify. And he said one thing that Minnesota could try to focus on next legislatively is that in our state that navigating that legal process itself can cost someone just $200 or $250 just to file something. He said if you don't have $250 or if you don't have $2,000 to pay the debt, you probably don't have $250.
Right, because you would have been using, if you had excess money, to start paying down that debt, I guess, by that logic.
Yeah.
All right. A lot to get our heads around, but certainly interesting. Thank you so much, Kent.